sharing my screen right now. Yeah, I think you've disabled screen sharing from attendees.
Oh, have I? Oops. So that means I need to fix that. Sorry, that how I did that, I don't know, but let's make sure that we allow you and anyone else here. So make host. You are now a host. So you should be able
Okay.
to share.
Yes, I am able to share now. Okay, so yeah, so last time we discussed about GMH and my strategy on how I implemented GMH for performance benchmarking. This time I wanted to discuss the possible implementation, how we could implement performance benchmarking into Git plugin. And I think I'll start with that and then we will go on forward. So I have created an instance, a local instance of Jenkins. Okay, it's here. So I created a new Git SCM extension. Just like we have clone options, I created that. So basically when we go to the configure stage, okay, so the implementation I want is that I want to provide performance enhancement as an opt-in feature. So the users who want to improve, although it seems a bit trivial that users will always want to improve performance, but I thought it would be safe to first launch it as an option, and when we get sufficient user feedback on what we intend, if it's working that in that way, so then we can maybe remove the option and give all the performance improvements. So I'm not sure why this is so slow. Uh,
Your computer is busy delivering video to us as well. That's okay. We can
yes,
wait.
yes.
So for specific clarity, the project that you're showing on screen, the double fetch project, this is the one where you're attempting to remove the redundant fetch that is
Yes.
performed by the plugin today. The embarrassing, awkward, wow, let's do the work twice just because we could do it a second time.
Yes, yes, it's that project. Yes. So here in the additional behavior, when we're checking out, here I just added enable for performance improvement, and as soon as someone enables for performance improvement, we can change the name. I'm sorry about the name. What happens is that here I have the data bound constructor, which gets the value for enable performance. It's a Boolean, which is true or false. So how do I use this? When, oh, wait a second, my system is, yeah, so I populate environment variable. So I've put this git performance flag check inside the environment, and as soon as someone wants to enable performance, it's set true inside inside the environment variable. Now what happens is that I've also implemented the decorate variable, which we have for basically modifying clone options we have when we're cloning. And so decorate, what we'll do is that once I'll show how decorate works. I've tried to use it in git scm at one stage. Yeah, so here before creating the client, since we want to choose which implementation we want to use for the client, we have to decorate it before we create the client. Basically we want to modify the implementation before we create the client. So here I loop through the extensions. I find that a user has opted for performance improvement. So I basically decorate the environment variable with the Boolean. And now after this, if I want to change, if I have if I know if this is true, I would basically have conditional checks. So if I have wherever I'm creating a client and I have to choose between JGit and Git, I will have a check that if performance improvement is enabled, then I know that for that, when that is happening, if JGit is doing better in a scenario, I would use that code, use that path instead of the conventional path we are using currently. So that is what I thought, and I haven't tested it thoroughly as much as I'd want to. This was a thought I had. I just implemented this part of the code. I haven't actually coded any improvement as of now, so I cannot test it end to end. If this is what would be the issues, or what would be the concerns of this strategy. That is something I would like to discuss. I would like questions, concerns, and
Okay.
uh, and the second part, if I just want to complete, is that how do we collect user information after giving this as an optional feature. So two things I had in mind, since we will be using JMH, it basically generates a JMH report which would have the performance results which the user's system generated. So can we use that for user feedback? I don't know. The second was Jenkins telemetry, which is something when I was discussing with Oleg, he was saying since Git operations mostly depend on repository information or structure, why would we need uh, Jenkins telemetry to collect users data? What kind of users data would we collect? I think it needs a comprehensive evaluation. If you want to use Jenkins telemetry, what kind of data would we want from the user is something we would want. Probably I would want performance time, execution time for some individual operation. That's what I would want, but I'm not sure if that is possible or not to get that kind of information. So that's something I would have to explore. So yeah, this is what I thought about the implementation.
Okay, so telemetry information, the idea there was, so unwinding from the stack you described, telemetry information, that would be to help guide you to decide, should we implement this as the default or not? Or what were you envisioning there? So tell me more about the telemetry idea.
I think that the idea I had, it's just that I maybe I when I'm collecting, when I'm basically a user is I basically measure the performance in some way or the other. I am running the benchmarks, but I am not sure if we can hit so how are we getting the results? We're getting it in a JMH report. I'm not sure if the telemetry can extract the results from the JMH report. If that is possible, that would be a good thing. That we basically uh, we parse the JMH report. We understand that okay, Git fetch took this much time. We in our systems have some kind of reference that this is the this is the intended time intervals between which git fetch should perform if jgit is being used as an implementation, and that is how we can confirm that whatever changes we have implemented, they're actually working on a user system or not.
Okay, I was assuming that you might say things like, hey, I would like the telemetry to tell me the duration of the first git fetch, the duration of the second git fetch in the same checkout operation, so that we would know how much time we're going to save users in general by avoiding the second git fetch completely. However, I don't know that gathering that information is actually going to help us decide much. Just mental, my thinking was, if we could prove that the first fetch and the second fetch used exactly the same arguments, that's already our proof that it's a wasted second fetch. So we don't really need a telemetry then at all. We just, yeah, we've sampled, and we know that in those cases where second fetch is the same as first fetch, it by definition should get no more data. And
Yeah,
so,
but okay.
go ahead.
Sure. So when I was talking about collecting users' feedback, uh, I was talking about the changes we would do in implementations for maybe we use JGate for less than 5 MB repository size.
Oh,
So when we're doing that, how do I understand if it's working on different systems or not? That is what I was talking about in terms of users' feedback.
I
And
see. So
how do I, yeah.
So there it's a collection of, for some fixed period, we collect the duration of operations and we record the duration of the operation and the implementation they were using for that operation. Is that sort of what you're envisioning? So this
Yes.
LS remote took this long using the JGit implementation. And that's a
Yes.
data point that they report. We gather that for maybe a week from all users so that we can see, hey, average numbers in the real world look like this.
Yes.
Is
Yeah. It's a more clear interpretation of what I want to say. But my concern with that is that how would, because if we code, maybe we measure the time by nanotime, system nanotime. That's not something we would want to do to measure the time between an operation. We are using a performance benchmarking tool to do that. But I'm not sure if telemetry can access the results of our performance benchmark, because our performance benchmark would effectively be assessing the difference in implementations and the time taken by the operations in every system it's going. Because if we're putting the JMH module inside our build, right? So I'm confused about that, how to use Jenkins telemetry
Yeah,
in that case.
so my assumption was we would not embed JMH at all in the thing that we deliver, that for the telemetry piece, we just do the system nanotime that you were proposing and report the data to Jenkins telemetry. But I'm not a telemetry
Okay.
expert, so that felt like your goal then is to know what's the average time or what's the typical time used in the various implementations out in the real world. And we do that for a limited period, 1 week of data gathering, and then we
Sure.
stop the data gathering completely. Now, Pariche, have I misstated in terms of JMH? I think you had some JMH experience. I was assuming we would not bundle JMH with a shipping Git plugin.
No, I have little experience with GMH, but I think, yeah, like in the production, it's not a very great idea to bundle GMH because
Okay.
it's an extra like set of feature which user will not be directly using. I mean, is there performance issues if we bundle GMH?
I don't know
Uh,
about performance issues, but I'm hesitant. We've suffered in the past when somebody detected a new method added to the Git plugin and thought it was a published API and decided they would use it. And so I am very hesitant to have the Git plugin develop any new published APIs. And so shipping JMH with it risks that it would suddenly, somebody might think, oh, the Git plugin is now volunteering to give JMH to everybody. And I don't want to do that.
like, yeah, I agree with you. Like it's not ideal to ship JMH for all the users, but we can do if that is an experimental way and we think it wouldn't be a blocker for our process. So we can just host it on. Uh, am I audible?
You are.
You are.
We can hear you.
Okay. So I mean, we can test it on ci.jenkins.io. I mean, Jenkins official image.
Oh, you make
If
a
that is
good
possible.
point. We could ask Rishab, instead of doing telemetry, we could ask to be allowed to deploy to ci.jenkins.io and get a custom build and gather the data there. That would be a much narrower sample, but it's still a very heavily used narrow sample, right? When we talk about the thousands and thousands of jobs that run on ci.jenkins.io, all of them using Git, now it's, again, it isn't as broad as doing Jenkins telemetry to the whole user base. The user base would give us much more useful data, much more accurate data about the general experience.
Would
Okay.
we need correlation with repos though? Is that maybe what Oleg was hinting at in terms of like, for the same repo, what does this look like with the enhancements versus without?
See, I was thinking we would, well, it's a good question. I was assuming we needed repo size or an approximation of repo size, but we don't particularly care about the exact repo. But
Okay.
Rishab, tell me what your thoughts are there. So I was assuming that the data would be used to say, hey, we're seeing that JGit behaves like this for repos of this size range. And we're seeing that command line Git behaves like this for repos of this size range. But
Exactly.
maybe that's
That is
not what
I,
you were envisioning, Rishab.
no, that is what I am thinking of. Yes. For a
So
particular repository size, we check what is the performance for a particular operation.
I was just thinking there's like maybe a couple other elements to that potentially, and I could be completely wrong, but just a curiosity is like I wonder if the number of objects might also play a factor in addition to size,
sure.
things like that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe having that correlation of like what the actual Git repo is, and then you can dig into that a little bit more. I don't know if telemetry, like if it was on a user's Jenkins, if that would have that also. So maybe my point here is not.
Well, I think that
I,
one of the
yeah.
challenges for telemetry is as soon as every time we gather another piece of data or ask for permission to gather another piece of data, we risk them saying, no, that's too sensitive. I would expect repository URLs, for instance, to be too sensitive.
Yeah.
But number of objects in the repository and estimate of repository size on the disk probably isn't too sensitive. But again, we'd have to check with the people who care deeply about security to decide to get their guidance. Are we allowed to even ask to compute that value and ship it back to the Jenkins telemetry?
That was a concern I had
Okay.
also, was the security aspect and privacy.
Is there a way to do A/B testing on Jenkins plugins?
A/B
Like
testing.
we can have two releases. It would be beta releases, and like one would have JGit implementation, and another would have CLI Git implementation, and we can then study the user. I mean the performance.
I think we could get A/B style data out of the telemetry that Rishab was proposing without actually doing A/B testing, without having to ship two versions. Because what I think Rishab was proposing is let's gather the data that tells us which implementation they're using and what's the repository size and how long did the operation take. And with that, we now have a collection of data that tells us who's using which implementations. And I would expect 95% or more will be command line Git. It's the default. And 80% or more will be 5 meg or less repositories. But then we start getting a shape, that data to tell us, are the hunches correct? Did
Yeah,
that
I think
address your question?
Go ahead,
Okay,
Parcha.
another question. Yeah. Someone wants to speak?
Go ahead,
No,
Justin.
No, go ahead, Parcha.
So, Rishabh, you showed in the UI that user would be adding additional option. So, like in cases where user is using GitHub branch source plugin or GitLab branch source plugin or any other SCM, they like depend on the Git plugin for the functionality. So, how would these plugin would be like using this particular feature? I mean, enabling the check.
that is a very good question, and I did not think about that.
So that's an excellent question, but I think I may have an answer. The GitHub branch source plugin and the Bitbucket plugin and the Gitty plugin and the GitLab plugin all use REST APIs, right? To do a large chunk of their work rather than relying directly on the Git plugin. For the places where they use the REST API, it doesn't involve the Git plugin at all. When they use the Git plugin, for instance, in a job definition, these extensions are already available to them or not, depending on user choice. So what the technique Rishab showed us would actually work just as well for somebody that is using the Git implementation to do their branch source work. So it would be available to them and available to them by their explicit choice, I think.
Yeah, so they would, yeah, I think they would basically just need to make sure that they would have the upgraded Git plugin version and then they would also need to activate the choice. I guess I'm kind of rephrasing what you just said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. You said it exactly. Yeah.
Okay, the plugin should have updated Git plugin version, or the Jenkins instance should have.
The
Jenkins
Git plugin. You would have to use a newer version of the Git plugin to get this capability that Rishab would have put in.
Okay.
So technically, you would be able to potentially upgrade your Git plugin without having like GitHub branch source or GitLab branch source have its dependency upgraded, and that would work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You could do it the other way too, where like GitLab branch source and GitHub branch source all update to it as well. But
it would be nice to test it once. I mean, like see how it's panning out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I need to research more on how Jenkins telemetry is used, and we've had a great discussion on why Jenkins telemetry cannot be used, and I think I'll research more on that.
Well,
Had some great inputs.
and Rishab, I think one way to launch the research actually is just to start an email thread on the Jenkins developer list saying, hey, we think, or you and I maybe work together to format how you want to ask the question, but it's, hey, we think that the project should do a 1 week telemetry gathering from Jenkins, from Git plugin users of the Jenkins or Git plugin release to gather the following data. And we want it for a limited time, and here's the data we want to collect, and here's a hint of how we intend to use it. And then the developer list, Daniel Beck and others will probably chime in and say, yeah, that's a reasonable idea. Oh no, that's completely unacceptable. And then we know very quickly if that's
Okay,
even reasonable.
that's great.
I guess I have another question too. Do you have a sense of how fast Git plugin users adopt new features? So this is something someone has to turn on, right? So like, would we get, and maybe that's where you're going in with percentages, like a low percentage of people who would go with this new option.
So I've got a sense that the data I gathered said that over 50% of the 250,000 installations of the Git plugin are using at least Jenkins 2.204. So they are only 1 LTS back level, which is quite good. All right, so that says 125,000, over 125,000 installations are only 1 LTS back. Therefore, it hints, okay, they're staying pretty current for roughly half the. It'd be great if all of them were, but I don't care. It's wonderful that 125,000 of them are only 1 LTS back. So I suspect the adoption will be relatively rapid. Relatively rapid in that I think we'll get 10,000 installations in the first 1 week. And therefore, for me, data from 10,000 installations in that 1 week would be quite interesting and useful to say, okay, what is the spread or the dispersion of the data that we gathered in terms of use of command line Git versus JGit and size of repositories and number of objects in repositories.
And I guess it would also give the answer of how fast would they turn that on to. So
right, yeah, that's the other.
There's some demand.
We'll get a hint very quickly, right?
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Okay, so the next thing we have on our agenda is we previously discussed testing the benchmarks on Jenkins IO agents, and I was exploring a way to run the benchmarks on those agents, and I found out that there is already a custom stage defined in the pipeline global library, and what we just have to do is in our Jenkins file, in a Git client plugin Jenkins file, we would have to add this after the build plugin stage, and this would run the benchmarks. Is basically running the test statement profile of a Maven test profile, and it basically runs them on high memory nodes. So high mem nodes means high memory nodes, right? And
Right.
do we have the high mem nodes on our when we're on our CI for Git plugin? Is that what
Yes.
we have?
Yes.
Okay, so this is how we can test them on the agents, and I would quickly like to raise a PR to test the existing benchmarks I have on these agents, and I'll quickly do that. So the issue I have, with this is that how do I put my the Git repositories I would want to fetch. Like for now in my local system, I had locally fetched the Git repositories to test the benchmarks, to have the benchmark completely isolated from the environment. How would I do that in a Jenkins IO agent?
So if you look in the Git client plugin automated tests, and I can send you a link to the specific test, there is a step there which does a caching copy of remote repositories local as part of an early stage step anyway. So I think we could just use that same technique, and then you put it on GitHub somewhere. Your reference repositories go on GitHub, and as one of the first, as a very early step, it copies it to the local agent and then uses the local copy.
Okay, that's great.
I wonder if you could use like plugin repositories as test data too, because you'd have some rich, like very.
You're going into a dark place, Justin, because the benchmark sources, let's see, plugin repositories, the Linux kernel. I mean, there are all sorts of. When Rishab gets to the point of really deadly serious benchmark stuff, there are some frightening repositories out there, right? The Linux kernel has lived in Git for what, 10 years now, and it receives hundreds of commits a day, all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's the poster child of worst case behavior repository, and yet Linus uses it all the time. So it hints. We have some great sample data. Oh, it's scary how good a sample data we've got available when we're ready for it.
Excellent. Sorry to scare you, Rishab.
So, I just curious, the Linux repository is hosted in ci.jenkins.io?
No, they are not, and they shouldn't be. It's a 2 gigabyte monster, and no, we should not. But it was an example of if we needed a really pathological case, a really very frightening case of performance test, there are plenty of very frightening, very, very big performance test cases out there. No, you should not use that initially. No, you should not use that for a very long time, Rishab, if ever.
Okay, noted. So, after that, the next thing is how will the user interact with the JMH reports which JMH will generate? So one of the options I have discovered is that since the JMH framework, it generates a JSON report, there is a existing plugin, which uses a JMH visualizer. Basically, what it does is it takes the JSON and this is how it visualizes it. Taken it from a previous GSoC project, role strategy plugin, and we would have to use the plugin, the visualizer plugin, to feed the JSON to it, and then this is how we can show the results to the user. The user can see the results. This is one of the ways, or maybe we could just give them the JSON and it's their choice to interpret the results however they want to. That's also an option.
So this is actually a Jenkins plugin that we could ask to be installed on ci.jenkins.io to visualize the data?
Yeah, I found out. Yeah, JMH report. Visualize the results of your JMH benchmarks. So this is a website, JMH visualizer. So you can you just have to upload your JSON here, and it has integrated this the same to that plugin, to Jenkins basically. So I think we can use this. I would have to test it, of course. I haven't tested it. I first tested and then.
That looks very promising. I am happy to install that too, and on my installation, that looks great. Excellent, very good.
Yes,
Okay, so this.
One
yeah.
comment about that plugin. The last release was 2 years ago. So we should first to check if the plugin is abandoned or not.
Good point.
Relying on it, yeah.
Well, and that's when Rishab, you and I could certainly install it on our personal Jenkins instances, experiment with it. If we find out it's completely broken, we know not to use it.
Sure. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. Okay. And yeah, one of the last things I had, what is the time? 8:30. So would we validate our results statistic in, how do we make sure that our results are they're right? My point was that, can we use confidence intervals or something like that? Maybe we have an observation of 30 data points, which we can assume as a normal distribution. We can have the mean, we can have the standard deviation, then we can calculate the confidence interval or the average execution time for a particular operation, and maybe we can use that as a reference. We can give that as a reference to the users. What I'm not sure about is that, since those confidence intervals would be calculated on our systems, would that be the true representation of the population, the data points, or the real performance? That is something I'm not sure about. I am not a big expert on statistics, but something I was thinking about, that since we would test our benchmarks on a lot of machines, but we still should have a way to consolidate those results. Giving an interval would be an easy way to use as a reference for people to understand if the implementation is changed in a certain way, maybe from Git to JGit. This is from maybe 50 milliseconds to 100 milliseconds. That is what we expect is the range of average execution time. Maybe we can mention the systems we have tested and how we've reached to this result, to the CIs we are giving. But it's something I was thinking about, and I wanted feedback from you guys. Is this something we can think about?
Yeah, I am not a statistician. I'm accustomed to, when numbers are separated far enough from each other that I can visually detect that, yeah, this is clearly not the same as that I haven't had to worry about confidence intervals, because the gap between them was so great. And when the gap isn't that great that I would worry about confidence intervals, it was also didn't matter which one I chose. So I've, at least for me, I'm not overly worried about this one, but I like the notion that we sample on many locations and that we gather those samples. And ci.jenkins.io actually already has access to a number of very interesting sample sources: ARM64, PowerPC, System 390 from IBM mainframes, Linux, or AMD 64 Linux. So we've got some interesting data sources already that we can use to say, hey, look, when we run on ARM64, it behaves like this. When we run on AMD 64, it looked like this. And I think we'll already get, just by the mere act of running on ci.jenkins.io across those different architectures, we'll get data that will either tell us we need this kind of confidence reporting, or the separation is so great we don't have to worry about the confidence interval reporting.
Okay.
I mean, your data earlier, Rishab, indicated to me what you saw was dramatic differences between command line Git and JGit, and they were visibly different. I mean, the reader looking at the charts would see no risk of any overlap between those two data sets.
Agreed. Yeah. Okay, so we can first test and see the results, and then we can decide if we want this or not.
Right. At least that was my thought.
Yeah, I'd say keep it in mind, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Mark, I had a question for you. Like, at what point of time during Git plugins development did this confusion come between JGit and Git CLI?
The command line Git implementation was inserted into the plugin in 2000, was the first implementation. It was inserted, I think, 2009 or 2010. And then 3 or 4 years later, it was JGit was added because it was viewed that, hey, a pure Java implementation has to be better than calling a separate program. That was where I got involved because it turned out that that assertion was completely false. A pure Java implementation was nowhere near as good as calling a separate program. Oddly enough, Linus and his colleagues write really great C code, and it's really, really hard to write Java code that is as fast as Linus's C code. It just
was the assertion that the call out itself was maybe like a performance bottleneck?
Right, fork time. There's a serious fork overhead on Windows. There really is. It's non-trivial, but even with that, the performance work that Linus and all the other Git implementers had done on the C code, it's very, very hard to write Java code that's as good as that C code is. So yeah, and Pariche, I could dig you more details. I did a presentation long ago about the history of the Git plugin that has some frightening information about how long it took before tests even arrived in the Git plugin. So you and I, we could have a long conversation about the evolution of this plugin. Rishabh, back to you. Excuse my sidetrack.
That's okay. That's perfectly fine. So this is what I wanted to discuss. I think this is it. Yes, from my side. Mark, you wanted to discuss Git plugin release plan and.
Yeah, if everyone has got just 2 minutes, I'd propose to inform you all of that. That way you're aware. So we have an upcoming release, Jenkins 2.235.1, which is the next generation long-term support release. It will come out in about 4 or 5 weeks. That release includes some user interface improvements. One of those user interface improvements really needs some changes in the Git plugin so that the Git plugin does not look ugly on 2.235. Uglier than necessary. It already looks ugly. It will look ugly. But in order to, what that means, we would like to deliver a release of the Git plugin about the time that 2.235 releases. There is, in addition to that, a proposal to include pipeline symbols instead of the awful, horrible long strings that we use now, to use short form symbols. So today, when I say checkout, open paren, it says $class, git scm, long verbose thing. We want to switch that and use short symbols so that they're easy to read. Those are the 2 key features. Yes, that's the way, Justin. Yeah, me too. Like, I would like something that looks better than that, and it's pretty low bar to look better than that awful syntax. So those 2 key features, and then there's one additional feature requested by Mike Cirioli, asking to add support for extended read permissions into the Git plugin, so that you can see certain things when long story, we've got a pull request for it. And those will happen over the next 1 or 2 weeks. We'll get those integrated. We'll do a beta release and then 2 weeks of beta. And after 2 weeks of beta, about the time that 2.235 releases, we'd like to release Git plugin 4.3. So Rishabh has expressed some interest in being willing to help with that. And I am great with that. I don't want to derail his project work, but we're going to be working for about the next 4 weeks trying to get the Git plugin 4.3 ready to go. Yeah. Any questions or concerns there? Any red flags?
Yeah, I think that sounds great. If you feel comfortable doing that with the amount of time you have, Rishabh, like, I think that'd be fantastic.
All right.
Always helps to play around with things more to get familiarity, right?
Well, and I enumerated a long test plan of things that Rishab might consider doing. The things that I'd enumerated are actually sort of what I'd call corners of the plugin that he would not have encountered in doing performance work. And so he may say, hey, I'm not interested in those corners. I'm okay with that. But those corners, they're, Fran, for your info, they're the pipeline shared library definitions of browsers and those kinds of things to be sure that we haven't broken compatibility. All right, so Rishab, thank you. That's all that I had on Git plugin 4.3. Did we meet all the things that you needed in this meeting?
I think yes. Yes. What I had in my mind, I've discussed, I've expressed, and yes.
I think
All
it's
right.
a good idea that Rishabh would be able to contribute to the plugin releases. It will also help him getting familiarized with the other features of plugin, and he could implement it in his own new features. So it will anyway help you in your project. So that's a good thing.
Very
Yes,
good.
Parisha. Yeah. Okay,
All
so
right.
Rishab, you had a question earlier about adding the environment stuff, and you were curious. I don't know if you had a question about how you might be able to like check out whether that's working well or not.
yeah, the improvement option I'm adding using the environment in the environment variable. That is what you're talking about.
Yep.
Yeah. So to test that, I would have to maybe add some kind of prototype implementation where I'm switching from one implementation to other, and I'm using that flag, and then I test it when I opt in for the feature. How is it working? And uh, I would after that maybe evaluate, and would want you guys to evaluate if that is the correct approach to use it as an option. If I'm using it as an option, is that the right approach to populate an environment variable, to add an extra variable, extra check in the environment variable, and use it like that? Is that the right way? It's something I would not.
Yeah,
I
and so
think I would want feedback on that.
that's relatively uncommon. The plugin currently tends to use variables that are attached to the, rather than environment variables, it uses fields on a Java object to represent that kind of state. So if you were to look at, there are some other places in the plugin where it has recorded how it's choosing to do something and allows the user to override if they wish. And rather than using an environment variable to pass it around, it actually uses just a private field or even a public field on the, public's a bad choice, private field on the object with a getter and a setter. So
Okay.
I think look there for, there are usually some big comment blocks around things that have been done, for instance, for security fixes or for this or that problem where we had to retain compatibility, but we had to fix a problem, but allow people an escape hatch in case they needed it to go back to the old way.
You're talking about the flags you can pass to Jenkins to turn it off.
Exactly, right. Those kind of things. That's more common. I don't think there's any implementation that uses an environment variable today in the Git plugin to pass the kind of information you're trying to pass. I think it rather uses these variables, properties that can be set at startup time to say, hey, I want this behavior or I want that behavior.
Rishabh,
Yeah.
all these properties are populated in Git SCM. Just a second. Git SCM source context class, so you can check out that.
Okay. Thank you, Parisha, for that. I'll look into that.
I'll share
Yeah, and
the-
there's some tricky bits around envars. They're not particularly super mutable in some circumstances, but like the MVP way of potentially testing your approach might also be just to, like, when it's turned on, you log to the console. Like that's like the simplest way to kind of like verify your functionality. And then I think your other proposal of also like implementing like a stub implementation or something like that is also a good way to go about it.
Okay, Justin.
That makes sense. Maybe I'm off my rocker.
Yeah.
No, that's, yeah, that there's you will certainly not pollute the log any more than the Git plugin already pollutes the log. It is a very low bar to not pollute the log more than the Git plugin is horrible at how much pollution it puts into console logs and how much we depend on that horrible pollution to fix problems. So
yeah, sometimes the pollution is necessary.
Yeah, shame on us. Yep. Rishab, anything else?
No.
All right, thanks everybody. So I will send an invite. One of the things that I've worried about is that we may not be connecting with Rishab frequently enough. So I'll send a doodle poll to look for a second time when we could meet with Rishab so that we could meet twice a week rather than once a week for the next 2 or 3 weeks until we get to the end of May. All right, so look for that poll.
For the whole entire period of the project, because during my time we were having 2 meetings per week, and
okay. So it wasn't just during community bonding for you, Pariche. It was always.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Then I'll make it for the whole project. Good. I'll do that.
We can always adjust if we feel like it's too much, but yeah.
All right.
Should be fine.
Also, another suggestion I have for Rishabh, like during your project, you will be getting assist from the entire Jenkins community, not just all the mentors. So there will be a lot of technical debts and all. So it's not always possible to have a video meeting and every point of time. So rather not get stuck and use Jenkins developer mailing list, and you have to build that habit of having text-based conversation as well. So it kind of helps. So
that's a great one.
actively use that. That's a very great resource if you want to develop a plugin on Jenkins.
Okay, Parisha, I'll do that definitely. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for your time. I'm going to go ahead and end. And Rishab, we'll talk to you in a week for sure. And I'll send an invite looking for a time before then.
Okay, sounds great.